Last winemaker who is going to talk to you is also an Eran. It's our Eran Goldwasser. He studied enology at the University of Adelaide, and he worked as a winemaker's assistant at the Salitage Winery in Western Australia. Upon his return to Israel, Eran joined the Carmel Winery. We heard about that earlier. And from there, he moved on to Yatir Winery, where he is now in charge of the vineyard and the wine production process. Eran, your vineyards are not far from the Negev desert. Do you need a lot of water for the wines?
Yes, we do. We need a lot of water for the vineyards, but a lot, is relative. It's much less than apple trees and cherries and apricots or citrus groves. So it's quite logical to plant vineyards in that region. Almost everywhere in Israel, people need to irrigate the vineyards. You can do it the old way without irrigation in deep valleys. In places with more than, I would say, 350 millimeters of rain each year. But let me touch more on the subject of growing in the challenging conditions of an arid area or a semi-arid area or the edge of the desert, as you said. I'll start with a map which is called a phytogeographic zone map. And this is basically looking at the botanical aspect of geography. And you can see that most of Israel is in the Mediterranean zone, and both Tzor'ah and Golan Heights. And most of the vineyards in Israel and the wineries are growing in this Mediterranean climate, which is, as Victor said, quite similar to what you will see in Europe. But then we have another interesting zone, which is the Irano-Turanian zone. And this is a zone which is surrounded by desert in all other aspects, where you cannot possibly grow grapes. It is a zone where grapes do not grow naturally, but it is a zone that we know from history, people used to grow grapes there. We see the wine presses, we have archaeological evidences that people used to grow grapes there. They grew grapes there because they could and they wanted. It was not natural, but it was possible. And in my short presentation, I would like to touch on the prerequisites of what you need to do to be able to grow grapes. And can you even hope to get some quality grapes and quality wines in that region? So we move on. And in that little picture, you can see a vineyard that we are currently buying grapes from. In the deep reaches of the desert, and talking a little bit about the advantages that you can get if you go into that trouble of growing grapes in such a region. So first of all, because of the very little rainfall we get in winter, usually in the order of 100 millimeters, you can very easily control the vigor of the vines. If I would say one of the two biggest challenges of grape growers in Europe is to try and control the vigor of the vines. They're doing some green harvesting and hedging and all kinds of manual mechanical manipulation to control vigor and have a balanced vine. Here, you almost don't need to do that. You can just control the growth of the vine with irrigation. And the other challenge of grape growers in the northern hemisphere is disease pressure. We have all kinds of fungal diseases that are encouraged by humidity, and many people need to spray for that. So for desert grape growing, this problem is almost non-existent. Because the growing season is sunny, with no chance of rain, you can very easily reach phenolic ripeness. and have grapes with a lot of flavor and color. And rainfall during harvest is not an issue. You can be very flexible in deciding your vintage date. But of course, some very serious disadvantages. The main one, as you touched before, was insufficient water to support even the basic vine growth and vitality. If you don't irrigate, you can't grow grapes. The vines will die. The other thing is the excess of sunshine and evaporation can delay the ripening. Where in Northern Europe, mostly sunlight is a limiting factor and heat is a limiting factor for ripeness. In Israel, evaporation and heat are becoming a limiting factor for ripeness because the vines just shut down at the heat of the day. The stomatas close in order for the vines not to lose water, and then the vines cannot photosynthesize, and the process of accumulating sugars and flavor and color can stop. And you can lose a lot of acidity and aroma in the process of bunches being exposed to heat and sunlight. So there are a few steps that we need to take and things that we need to have to be able to grow quality grapes. Obviously, we need to have a water source. And then we need to have a site, to choose a site with a high elevation to get cooler nights and cooler evenings and cooler mornings, and have as a bigger part of the day as we can with the lower temperatures. Soil selection is also very important because a lot of the soil in the desert is wind-blown sand that has deposited. We call it loess. And you can also find this type of soil in Northern Europe coming from glacier activity. That's just an anecdote. But for us, this type of soil is very challenging because it usually is very saline. So you will need to find a site that is not saline. We can protect the bunches and the soil from excess radiation by having a big sprawling canopy, something like a bush vine that can shade the undervine soil and the bunches and keep them a little bit cooler. And then things that we can do towards harvest is just harvest early. I think in this type of weather, there is no point for waiting for a long time. We need to keep as much freshness and fruitfulness in the berries. Something which is crucial is choosing the right grape varieties, because if you're gonna have, continuing from what I said before, if you're growing a grape like Cabernet Sauvignon, which is very late ripening, so you won't be able to harvest early. On the other hand, if you go for something like Syrah or Chardonnay for the white grapes, you will have maturity in July or the beginning of August, so you can harvest before the big heat of August. And also, I think it's better to choose varieties with thinner skins, because these varieties usually have a less problem of phenolic maturity, and you can safely harvest them a little bit earlier, have the fruit freshness, but on the other hand, don't have the unripe tannins that you can get from thick-skinned grapes. How did the people 1,500, 2,000, 4,000 years ago manage to do those things? Because I said before that people used to grow grapes in these areas before they had the possibility for irrigation. Well, they had an ingenious system of channeling rainfall water that would, the very little rainfall that will occur in winter was channeled with a system of dikes and small channels from the hillsides into the valleys. And then the ratio was that you have, for 1 hectare of vineyard, you had 25 hectares of rainwater collecting area. And so they, in one hand, enrich the soil with the water, and on the other hand, this abundance of water will wash the salinity of the soil. And indeed, they were able to grow quite a lot of grapes and quite a lot of wine in this way. And you can see an aerial picture of one of our vineyards again. And it is built on ancient terraces. And we can see that the soil in this part of the vineyard is much, much less saline than the soil in the other parts that were not found in the past, because of this effect of washing off the excess salinity. So I talked a little bit about winemaking in the really arid and desert area, but I have to say that most of the grapes that here at the Yatir winery we are processing into wine does not come from the arid area. And please have a look at this map of rainfall in Israel. And you can see that this is the desert part of Israel. And then you have a line with 200 millimeters of rainfall. And this is the area that we grow grapes in for Yatir winery. And we are actually located right in this part of the country. And it's a borderline area between the desert and the Mediterranean climate. And I feel that growing grapes in this region allows us to benefit from the advantages of the desert with the low humidity and control of the vigor. But on the other hand, the disadvantages of the desert are much less felt here, because the soil is much deeper and more fertile and less saline. We get a little bit more rainfall, and also in winter we get snow sometimes, combined with a little bit higher elevation than the desert, up to 800 meters. We are able to get this type of vineyards, which look much more like Mediterranean climate vineyards. So closing our subject, I would say that it is possible to grow grapes in the desert. It is more challenging, but also possible to grow quality grapes in the desert for winemaking. You should watch your objective, because if you're trying to make a wine in a classic European style, big and structured, probably you won't be able to do it. And I think maybe in a way similar to what happened in the Northern Europe, where people pushed the boundaries of grape growing in areas like the Mosel or Champagne. You can hardly grow grapes there. It's not natural for grapes to grow there, but through human ingenuity and maybe thinking out of the convection or the orthodox ways, you can come up with superb wines. And we are probably in the beginning of this process for Israel, and I'm optimistic that we will make some interesting discoveries in the future. So that's about it for me. If you have any questions, I would be glad to answer.
Thank you very, very much, Eran. Fascinating and interesting. I've never heard anything like it. Do you think that, especially because of the climate change, other regions of the world can learn from you?
Yes, actually people have started doing that. We had one group coming a year ago from Bordeaux to try and see what they can learn from us. One thing that they've seen and were quite impressed with was the way we are starting to bury the irrigation lines between the rows of vines. We don't just put them on top of the ground, but we bury them underground to try and minimize evaporation loss and increase the efficiency of irrigation.
Perfect. Sounds very interesting. Thank you very much, Eran.